Good morning, it's Shane and Chris here from the Right Spotters. Today, I'm going to put Chris on the hot seat, so to speak. So, when we're wanting to be paid as a freelance writer, really the only person you have to impress at the beginning is your editor. An editor is probably the hardest person to impress. If you can impress your editor and your editor likes your work, then you can be sure that your audience or the audience of the website will like it because it got past the editor. So editing is kind of like a secret sauce that happens behind the scenes. Most of the work that you see online has been edited heavily. Editing makes the writer look good. And I regard the editor as like the unsung hero in the basically in the whole writing process. Yes, the writer is creative, the writer produces good work, but it's the editor that kind of just does the old spit and polish job, so to speak, on your writing. So, Chris, we're going to put Chris on the hot seat today because Chris is the best editor that I know that I've ever worked with. So, my first question, Chris, because you've edited a lot of stuff, what's probably the most number one mistake you see with writers who submit their work to you, particularly when you work for Breaking Muscle and T Nation? What thing grinded your gears the most?
Okay, thanks. Appreciate the intro. I can think of like two or three editors that are going to be like, I'm better than Chris, but fuck them.
Oh, we don't worry about it. We're not going to worry. We're not going to worry about them. That's just my opinion.
Mine too. So, yeah, what's the question? Yes. So if you submit an article for publication, it's generally after I've contacted you and we've discussed an idea about, hey, I think it would be good for you to write an article about the barbell curl, and tell people how to do it and how to program it, and for whatever reason our site needs that. So that's your assignment: is give me an article about the barbell curl. If you submit something that is like surface level, just on the surface, discussing it lightly, and you like don't really dive in, don't really give it any personality or depth or like anything interesting, like grab the bar and curl the bar and put the bar down, that's not helpful. That's not a good article. Like, yes, you technically answered the assignment of you wrote an article, but if it's not good information, it's not like eye catching, or if I didn't or a reader's not going to learn something new, it needs to be refined and polished up. So, if you have an assignment for a specific topic, even if it's a relatively simple topic, you can still dive into it. I've seen great articles on dumbbell curls, like very in-depth stuff, very research-heavy stuff. Because surprisingly, there's a lot of research on, mind-muscle connection and tendon stretching. And
are we talking about Merrick? We must be talking about Merrick Lincoln here, right?
We might be talking about Dr. Merrick Lincoln's phenomenal incline dumbbell curl article, which is
Merrick. Yeah, he's the man. Anyway.
So yes, so that's regardless of the topic, however simple it might appear to you, you need to make it interesting, and you do that by putting your own spin on it, and by imagining, instead of writing about it, you're talking a client through that in the gym, in a session. So make it conversational, make it educational, rather than just like black and white. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes sense. I think that's been probably the biggest knock against me. It's just not explaining yourself. It's like you say something, you state a fact or whatever, and then you don't back it up. Now, Andrew Gutman got on me all the time for that. I mean, all the time for that. So I think that you bring up a great point. Yeah, it's great that you have the knowledge, and you understand it when you write it down and you just leave it at that. But the reader doesn't, right? The reader needs it explained.
Right. Yeah. You can't take for granted that readers will understand certain points that you might just gloss over. Again, that's why you're not writing it to yourself. You're not writing it to other trainers. You're writing it as if you're talking to a client, as if you're talking to somebody who's never curled a bar before. You need to specify grab with an underhand grip or a supinated grip. Supinated pronated is another issue that may or may not be too technical. If you say, show me a supinated grip to 10 people on the street, they're not going to know what you're talking about. If you say, show me an underhand grip, they'll all go, right? Okay. So you can't assume people know all the steps that you do, because you're always trying to educate.
That's true. I was also so now we've gone into the number one mistake people make when submitting an article. So even from a new writer or an established writer, when you start editing an article, what's the number one thing that you look for when you start reading and editing? What's the most important thing that you look for?
The most important thing is when I get a new article, I open it up and I skim it just to see if it has the formatting that I'm going to need when it gets published. Does it have what looks like this section and this section and this section? Because I'm going to have to make sure before it goes on site that each section is explained. Whatever publication you're working with, they format their articles differently. You need certain points need to be addressed. So if you don't have how to program the barbell curl and you just talk about how to do it, I might shoot you an email and be like, hey, do you use 5 sets of 10? Do you use 4 sets of 6? Like, those kind of details matter. That's more information that you're giving to the readers that will help them put the article's content into action. So they need that information. And then once I start reading it, it's basic grammar stuff like, is barbell spelled with one word, or are you making it 2? It's always one word. Always one word. I've seen people do both. Same with dumbbell. It's one word. 2 B's. Right? Yep. Dumbbell. Right?
Yeah.
I'm blanking now.
Yeah, no, you're right. 2 B's is dumbbell. You're all right.
So I read it for basic grammar stuff, and then I'll read it again for the actual content, which I have a heads up on, I have a leg up on, because I was a trainer for a bunch of years. So if you're telling me to raise the barbell to forehead level, like, yes, that it's debatable if that's full range of motion, because front delts and whatever. But if you're telling me raise the barbell to, abdomen level, like, that's not a full range of motion. So technique wise and the actual performance of a given movement is the next thing that I look for. So make sure your steps are correct.
So we're talking about technical stuff is what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah, so the actual technical stuff.
Once you've looked at the formatting and then the grammar, then you look for the actual content, the technical stuff, whether it's correct or not.
Right. Yeah, that's usually the order I do it in. Because to me, that's just easier. Like, formatting is kind of big picture. Grammar makes it easy to read. And then the technical point by point, the finite points, is like the actual meat. You finally get to the meat of it. So I kind of work my way down.
So what are some tips for writers, even beginning or experienced writers, to make the editing process easier? What can writers do, say today, actionable tips that can make an editor's job easy? Because if you want to make an editor's job easy, is a good thing.
That's definitely a good thing. That's like, that's like if you're a trainer and you have a client who's been lifting on their own for 4 years, they have a base established, and they come to you and give you a better client to work with, essentially, rather than somebody who is a blank slate and you're training from zero. Mm-hmm. Really, I think the biggest thing, whether you're experienced or a new writer, is kind of know where you're writing or who you're writing to and where you're writing for. So, we've discussed this so many times, is you have to know your audience and know your readership. If you're writing for breaking muscle, that's a relatively muscle building focused group. It's fundamental strength and muscle and stuff.
Yeah.
If you want to write for whatever, Runner's World, I keep using an example, that's more cardiovascular based, of course. So you might not, like, if you want to write an arm workout, that might not be the best idea. That's not going to be a great fit for Runner's World. If you want to write how to improve your 5K time, that might be more of a better choice if that's your niche. So you always have to know who you're talking to, because that'll help figure out what you want to say and the way you say it. Even like we said, supinated and pronated. A site like T Nation or a site like Elite FTS, where the general readers are relatively more experienced, you can assume the average reader knows supinated from pronated. A site like Runner's World, even if you're writing about whatever exercise is appropriate, you can't really assume that they're experienced lifters. So you need to watch your terminology and your phrasing. So know your audience, know who's going to be reading it, and that should and must affect the way you write in a good way.
And that makes your job, that makes your job easier.
It definitely does, because then I don't have to go through and make those changes, which that's what an editor does. An editor is supposed to change your content so it fits the site and fits the readers. If you give me stuff that I have to make fewer changes on, it makes my workday a lot easier, and everyone's happy about that.
So I'm going to get into a couple of bugbears that you have. Not so much mistakes, but bugbears. I mean, you've done Facebook posts on how to spell biceps and stuff like that. So when you're reading a piece of work, even if it's, say, technically correct and the grammar is good, what really grinds your gears when it comes to writing, when it comes to editing? What's stuff that kind of just go, and you're like, I wish they didn't do that? What's some things that really grind your gears?
I've seen, it really kind of touches back on what I just said. I've seen some articles that were submitted where it had phrasings or like inside jokes that just weren't going to fly. Like either foul language, and they're saying just rip the shit off the ground. Like, you can't always publish that. Some sites can publish that. Some websites won't publish potty language, especially if it's more than once that it's happened. Like, if you submitted 3 articles and every single one I've had to remove a shit or a gay joke or a innuendo.
You had that happen?
I may have, yeah.
All right.
And it comes back to communication, where, as an editor, I shoot a note generally and say, hey, that doesn't fly. That's why we had to remove it. But if you keep trying to cram it in, it's not good business. Like, you're trying to do things your way, but you can't have things your way because you're literally being edited. Like, I'm saying, no, you can't write that. So get the message. So yeah, it's just stuff that, like, not reading the room, essentially.
Yeah, I gotcha. They're really great. So just as a lighthearted moment, so every time I write an article on the glutes, I use a Sir Mix-a-Lot reference. Almost every time. Gives my editor the absolute shits, but I can't help it because it's just, come on. It's Sir Mix-a-Lot, it's glutes, let's go. But yes, I can imagine that using that voice and putting that same pop culture reference would be annoying.
I mean, it can be. Like, we saw some stuff back in the T Nation days, in like the mid 2000s, early 2000s. Like, there was a lot of like Britney Spears references because she was like in her prime at the time. Or,
yeah,
is that legal? Let's do the math.
Yeah,
Backstreet Boy references. They were like Kardashian references, because crazy that they're all still around right now.
Yeah,
but like you said, it was pop culture references. And sometimes those are fine because they're topical, and if they fit seamlessly is fine. It gives it personality and gives it a little more flair. But you can actually run the risk of having it be like dated, because now if you read an article from 2009 and there's an article of reference to Britney Spears's abs, I'm like, okay, that's not really like anybody reading this fresh today in 2024 will not know what you're talking about. So you do have to like monitor yourself unless it's a truly timeless reference like Baby Got Back.
That right, that is.
It is, you know what?
Yeah.
It's a one-hit wonder for a reason.
Yeah. I'm not gonna. I promise I'm not gonna start singing. I'm really, really suppressing the urge right now. But anyway.
Yeah. Um, so yes. So just watch your phrasing. Have your personality. I'm not definitely not saying don't be you, because that's the best thing you can be. That's the whole point of you writing an article. I want to hear what you have to say, and I want to hear how you say it. If you're funny, be funny, but don't let it overshadow the content, the information.
Mm-hmm.
And don't be coarse just for the sake of being coarse. Don't throw in f-bombs to sound hard, or because that's what you're like in the gym, if it's not going to suit the website. Because if I can't publish it, I can't publish it.
Yeah, that's like what you said, like reading the room.
Definitely, yeah, definitely, and that again, that goes back to knowing who's going to be reading it. Like a website like Testosterone Nation, still has a lot of beginner, some beginner, not really a lot, some beginner lifters and some, teens and college kids and whatever. And it's not appropriate to drop f-bombs in your articles. Like, I don't think there have been really any, but we've edited some because they've come in, and there's no reason. That's just bad writing. On your blog is a whole different thing. I'm out of the picture on your blog. You're posting your own stuff, so go for it. Mm-hmm. But if you want to be published on somebody else's website, you have to play by their rules.
That's a great answer. So a question, I mean, with me personally, I mean, editing is tough for me to do. It's necessary, obviously, before I submit anything, and I go through it a few times. So what's some tips for writers, and particularly writers like me and beginning writers who write their stuff and then have to polish it up before they submit it? So what are some tips to make the editing process more seamless and also easier for writers before they submit it, before they submit their work or pitch their work to a website?
Okay. Really the first thing is never send your first draft, because your first draft is never great. So write your article, be what you think is finished, let it sit, be like, I finished the article, good, go do something else. Come back to it hours or a day later, read it over, and you better find some stuff you can improve, because it's there. It's definitely there. You can always improve your first draft. So read it out loud, preferably, because that'll help get your cadence and help you spot some more errors. Read it if you write it. Do some self-editing, which could be as simple as like trimming a couple of extra words because a sentence is too lengthy. It could be clarifying a specific point that was either you were vague on, or maybe you got into the weeds over explaining something. That can also be a problem. So do a little self-editing if you can, unless you're on a deadline. I would let that sit for some more time, give your eyes and brain a break, and get back to it again, and then give it another read, and it could be good to go, good to submit. But the biggest thing is to not send your first draft. So like, write it, self-edit as best you can. You will absolutely find something. And if you don't find anything to self-edit, you're wrong. Like, it's like going for a 3-rep max without warming up. It's a bad idea. You're not going to get it. So first draft, self-edit, make sure you find something to change or improve, and then send it in.
So you mentioned leaving it and letting it sit. So I'd say what 24 hours is like a minimum you should let it sit.
I would think like anything that's a substantial break. Like if you don't have the luxury of like that much time,
Yeah,
if for
that's
whatever
true.
reason you're on a deadline, if for whatever reason like your schedule is packed and it's I have to finish it today or I won't get back to it next week, like you need some time because your eyes will glaze over errors because they just came out of your brain.
Yeah.
So your brain's not going to pick them up right away. So a couple of hours at least, like overnight would be fine because you'll also think about it unconsciously or consciously. Once you're
I do that
finished,
all the time.
oh, yes, of
Yeah, I
course.
do it all the time. Yeah.
So if a day or two, it doesn't have to be like several days. Like I don't know if you have the luxury of that much time. If you want to, you might get distracted and not get in the same groove again because it won't be like
Mm.
fresh on your mind. So at least a couple hours if you can, a day or so, whatever. That's like whatever works for you.
A great piece of advice I got from Jeff Tomko just recently after I submitted a piece of crap and he was worried about me. He basically told me to slow down. He said, "You're good at what you do. You just need to slow down." So I think my number one piece of advice, besides what you said, is yes, we all work with deadlines, and we all want our work to be great. Slow it down a little bit. So when you have that mindset of just saying, "I don't need to submit it right now. I'll let it sit, and then I'll read back through it." And when you take that kind of slow down mindset, you're more likely to pick up errors. You're more likely to be able to clean things up, and you're more likely to look at it with fresh eyes. I think that's the biggest key with editing, particularly your own work, is that fresh eyes because you're just too close to it, right?
I think that's a definitely a good point, and that can apply to actually writing it, not just editing it. Like,
Yeah,
don't try to write a whole article start to finish in one sitting, or even like one day.
I mean, I can do that. I've done that before.
I mean, it's doable, but it's not advisable unless you have to.
Well, we all
Um,
can't be Roger Lockridge, right?
write 5 articles a day. Get that out of here.
Yeah,
Yeah. So, and like you said, you do need that second pair of eyes or a fresh set of eyes. It just helps to polish up your work. And again, like I said, if you do sit down and reread your work and you're like, that's fine, like it's not fine. I promise you. There's no writer who, in fitness or otherwise, who has a first draft that is top notch, publishable without changes. It's just not. You
it's
can
true.
change and improve something, definitely. That's the whole point of a first draft is to get the big chunk of marble there, and then you whittle it down into something more presentable.
Well, like, Stephen King has that rule because, I read that book that he likes to chop off 10% of what he's written. So I think particularly when you edit your own work, you're looking to subtract, you're not looking to add. Obviously, you need to explain a point. That's obviously it's just a hard and fast. This is not a hard and fast rule. But
Right.
when you're cleaning up your work, when you're self-editing your work, you're more likely to cut than add.
Oh no, you're definitely more likely to edit down than add on.
Yeah,
In fitness writing, it's a little bit different because you don't want to start taking stuff away just for the sake of I have to hit my 10% goal or whatever. So you don't want to ever sacrifice quality content or educational information just that doesn't belong or you think doesn't belong. Like you need to make sure you explain your points. So it can get a little bit tricky and a little bit muddy trying to self-edit and decide what to keep and what to toss. But yeah, it should always end up being a net loss in terms of word count. Like you shouldn't ever edit and the word count stays the same or goes up a bit. It should always go down a bit. So keep tabs on your total word count. And if it goes down by 100 words or 300 words or 7 words versus now I'm 35 words higher, what? Like there's something went wrong. So you
that's
have
a fair,
to,
that's a fair gauge, right? That's a real good tip. That's a real good sign,
Yeah,
right? When it goes, rather goes down and up. That's that's from my experience.
it's a good tool to keep an eye on. Yeah. And again, a word count is something that you and your editor might have discussed or probably discussed ahead of time. Like a lot of publications have like a minimum word count. When you get the assignment, they might say, I need a 1,500 word article about the barbell curl. And if you submit a 2,500 word article and you know they were looking for 15, it's overkill and it's going to get edited down. If you submit a 900 word article and they ask for 1,500, it's either going to get rejected or they'll add content. I've had that situation where articles have come in light on information, where I was expecting 3 paragraphs, I got a sentence or 2. And I was able to fill in the information that general enough and fit the author's tone and level of skill, but it's been an issue sometimes. So if you're being published, sticking to the word count really, really matters. Hit the target as close as you can. Within, a couple of hundred or 100 or so, give or take, is fine, 100-ish. But you should not be drastically above or below what they were asking for, what they were expecting, because that just adds more work to the editor.
Good stuff, Chris. I think we just about covered it. What do you think?
Cool. Yep. It's don't trust your first draft. Do some self-editing. Help your editor. Editor will help you communicate. Easy stuff.
Sweet. Now, here it comes. Now, you can find us on the Right Spotters on Instagram and also on Facebook. And you can also email us at therightspotters@gmail.com. Now, if you really want to see how Chris works, give him a piece to take a look at and he'll share his opinion with you. And you can trust that you're getting a good one because, like I said before, Chris is one of the best editors I work with. Use him. He's a great resource.
Use me. That's it. Just
don't abuse him. Just use him. Don't abuse. Just
I
use.
can take it. But we're here to help. That's I have almost 20 years editing, and like that's just it's sounds silly, but it's what I do. Like whatever.
Yeah. No, it's your superpower, dude. Okay. Everyone's got one. Superman can fly. Chris Colucci can edit. Let's go.
Okay. On that note, thanks. See ya.
See you next time.